Welcome to Life Community Church Online. We're so happy that you're joining us today. If this is your first time tuning in, please visit our website, lifecommunitychurch.net/church-online to fill out an online connect card. If you have kids, we have resources available for them each week, and we have Zoom meetings for our youth group on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Each week, we have our messages uploaded on Sundays to Facebook Live and to our website. And on Wednesdays, we have a live Q&A on Facebook Live at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for our message.
Folks, we want to take a moment just to thank God today for all the people that have served in the history of the United States in the military and armed forces, and the protection that they've provided and the many blessings that we have as a nation. And this Monday is Memorial Day. It's a time when we really say thank you and pay tribute to the people that have served our country by giving the ultimate sacrifice, their life. So take time to, even a veteran, someone that serves in the military today, but take time to remember those who have served our country so faithfully. Good morning, Life Community Church family, and welcome to week 10 under quarantine. And churches are starting to open up, some of them around the country and here in Delaware. But as for us, we're going to continue online for a season. And so we're thankful that you've joined in today and you're joining us. We're kicking off a new series today on the book of Ruth. And there's a lot of really wonderful parallels and lessons in this book, principles that we can glean that just have filled my heart up. I'm so excited to share this word with you today, and it's going to really set the backdrop for the next weeks as we continue to teach this book. So if you have a Bible, turn to the book of Ruth. If you have YouVersion, you can bring it right up on your phone, and we hope you take time to read through this book. It's just 4 simple chapters, and it takes maybe 15 minutes to read the entire book, but it's a beautiful love story that God has set in His Word. So let's jump into it. And this series will be called Ruth, Finding God's Redemptive Purpose. And over the next 7 weeks, as we teach through these 4 chapters, each week we're going to talk about examples of God's plan of redemption in the lives of His people. So anytime that you listen and hear one of these, stories of redemption, would you just send me a chat and say redemption? Hey, send us a chat and let us know you're here in the morning. Say hi. I love reading all your comments. But when you see redemption, send me a chat. And I think you understand redemption. In its simplest form, it just means to buy back. When I was a kid, many people on our street, they drank a lot of beer. And as kids, we would go and collect the beer bottles because they were worth a penny each. And we used to get boxes and boxes of these beer bottles. And sometimes we'd get $30. We'd use the money to go to the fair, right? Because the bottles belong to Rainier Beer. And if we would bring them back, they'd pay us a penny each. And we see this word used in terms of our relationship to God and our salvation in Romans 3:24, and what we call justification. And it's the price that God paid with His own blood to purchase the souls of all mankind. You see, when Jesus hung upon that cross, when He gave His life upon Calvary, He shed His blood to redeem the souls of all people. But it's only the people that believe in Him and trust in Him and put their faith in Him for salvation that God declares righteous. It's not just because we're good enough, and salvation isn't dependent upon who we are or what we do, but it's based upon who God is and what Jesus Christ has done for us upon the cross. He redeemed us. He paid the price necessary to purchase us for Himself. And this passage in Romans 3:24 is so beautiful because it says, being justified freely, being declared righteous freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, the price that was paid by Jesus. And the most beautiful expression of redemption is in its unlimited duration, right? Like, in other words, God paid for the sins of the whole world. And today, when a believer sins, right, and we do, right, when we fall away from God, and there are times that we will, when we make a mess out of our lives, and we have, you know what? God's already paid the price to bring us back, right? That's who God is. He paid it forward. His blood paid for the sins of the world for all time. So God, when you fall away from God, God doesn't give up on you. He doesn't change his mind on you. He's already provided a way of redemption to bring you back to himself time and time and time again. So as we tell this beautiful story, Ruth, from the scriptures, I hope that you're constantly thinking, how does this apply to my life, right? How's God going to pick up the pieces and put my world back together? And you may be watching this and saying, my life is just fine. I don't have any need for God to put my life back together. I'll guarantee you will, or somebody around you will. And what I want you to learn from this teaching on the book of Ruth is that God always has a plan of redemption. Look for it. Wait for it. Understand who God is. He is a God of redemption. So we're going to jump into this book, Ruth chapter 1, and we could start this by saying once upon a time, a long, long time ago, right? Like when I was a kid. No. Like when Earl was a kid. No. Even way before Earl. Like 3,000 years ago, right? This story took place. So I'm just going to read it, and I'm actually going to have a little bit of fun in this first reading of the first 5 verses. Notice what it says, Ruth 1. It came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn. It was just a short trip in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab, and they continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the Moabite women. And the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Now, when I look at the Word of God, we always try to follow didactic Bible study. That is observation. What does it say? Right? What does the text say? What do you observe when you read the text? And when I observe this text, 19 times in this paragraph, the word "and" is used. It's like a paragraph with run-on sentences, right? When you read it, it's almost like the writer was out of breath, right? Trying to get all the details out in less than a minute. And in fact, you can read those first 5 verses in a minute if you read them fast. Right? And he just, was getting it out as quickly as he could using this word "and." And then we want to say, what does it mean? Right? Interpretation. What do the scriptures mean? And then how do I apply it to my life? So as we observe this, we see that he's speaking this really fast. He's trying to get all the details out in the very first paragraph. He's giving us the setting. He's setting the stage for a story and really creating a backdrop, right? With the time of the judges when this beautiful picture of redemption would take place. And really, when I read this, it's a lot. In fact, it really sounds a lot like Job, doesn't it? Right? just like Job lost everything that he had in one day, and you saw a similar story in Job chapter 1. The brothers, all the family was gathered at the older brother's house, and then a servant came running in, and he told them that the Sabians came, and they fell upon him, and people were taken away, and there's a hurricane, and all of a sudden the winds blew, and the house collapsed, and the sons were lost, and the sheep, and the mules, and the donkeys, and all his possessions, and everything Job lost in one day, right? It's kind of this very similar tone, right? And Naomi also, this woman, lost a lot as well. And, as we slow down and we really look at this story, right? We want to just understand the timeline. When did this happen? Well, it was after Moses brought the children of Israel, right, out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. Remember, Moses stood, Exodus 14, at the Red Sea, and he held forth his staff, said, "Stand still and see the deliverance of the Lord." And the waters parted, and the children of Israel, they became the very people of God. He gathered them out of a nation, and he promised he would take them into their own land and make them his own people. And then as the Egyptians came charging across the desert, and the children of Israel were there, and they looked, mountains on either side, the sea before them, and they began to panic. And Moses stretched forth his staff, and the waters parted, and the children of Israel crossed on dry ground. And as the Egyptians came pounding across the desert, the waters capsized them, and they drowned right in their chariots, right? And it was after Joshua's conquest, which was probably right around 1405 BC, right, that Joshua led the children of Israel to cross into Canaan across the Jordan River. Remember, they came and the Jordan River was overflowing its banks, and Joshua had the children of Israel step with the priest first with the Ark of the Covenant into the Jordan rivers, and the Jordan River parted, and they crossed the Jordan River. That happened in about 1405, and the time of Joshua's conquest in the land of Canaan was about 25 years. 7 years they were in intense battles with the 12 tribes fighting against the people in the land of Canaan, but then some of them went back to the other side of the Jordan River, and it was 25 years that took place in the time of Joshua, the book of conquest. And then in the next book, in the time when the judges ruled, right, was about 1380 to 1015. If you count all the way from the first judges, right, all the way through Samuel, right, it was about 365 years, right? That was after Joshua, before the kings, before King Saul, and then David were coronated, right? So this is about where Naomi and Ruth would fall, right in the middle of the time of the judges, probably around from 1160 to 1100 BC, right? In the time of Gideon, most likely. And this woman, Naomi, it's a common name today. I was talking with a young girl on Zoom today, and we were meeting with the teenagers, and her name was Naomi. And this whole story is written from Naomi's perspective. It's very unique, right? Every event in the book, when you read it, relates back to her. It was about her husband, Elimelech, her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, her family's death, right? Her daughters-in-law, her return to Bethlehem, right? Her God, her near kinsman, Boaz, right? Her land, and eventually her grandson, and her lineage, her heritage, right? It's a story about a woman that was named after a woman from the perspective of a woman, right? And who's an example to women. And it's a beautiful love story. And there's a lot that us as men can learn from this story. And it's not all beautiful. It's a story of loss. And it's a story of grief. And it's a story of depression. And we'll talk about that a little bit next week. Because when Naomi lost all that she lost, it hurt. It was hard to lose. But God had a plan of restoration, right? A plan of redemption, provision, right? To restore to her what she had lost in many ways. And this beautiful story was written against the backdrop of a dark time, the dark time of the Judges, to reveal God's faithfulness, his selfless love, right? His loyalty and devotion to his people. And we can apply the principles that we see in this book, right, to all of our relationships. It teaches us, it's the story that teaches us that we belong to a loving, faithful, and powerful God who has never failed to care and provide for his people, right? So in a time of moral and spiritual decay, God was still there. He was still working and good things were going on, right? Sometimes we think that when there's bad things that happen in a nation or in a family, that everything is bad. But that's the amazing thing about life. Right in the midst of really tough times and really difficult things, God is also doing really beautiful things. And that's the story of the book of Ruth. So jumping into verse 1, it says this first phrase, in the time when the judges ruled, right? So a period of about 365 years, right? Counting all the way from, after the death of Joshua until the time of Samuel before the kings were coronated. And there's a lot here, right? I'm going to take just a little bit of time to give a little bit of history, just a little bit of history. It's what we call Israel's dark ages, right? From 1380 BC to about 1015 BC, right? It was a time that was characterized by Israel's failure to complete the conquest and establish a nation that truly lived under God, with God as their king. In fact, God wanted to be their king. He wanted to be their deliverer, right? He wanted to be their savior. But the people of Israel weren't ready for that, right? Like God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, but it would take thousands of years to get Egypt out of the children of Israel, right? In the book of Samuel, we see that the children of Israel, they wanted a human king like the other nations, and they chose Saul, a man that was head and shoulders taller than every other man in Israel, right? But his heart wasn't after God. So later, God chose King David. So in the period of the judges from Joshua until Samuel before Saul, God raised up 17 different deliverers, right? Starting with Othniel and Ehud and Shamgar and a woman, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Samson, all the way up to Samuel, right? And these judges would be used of God to temporarily rescue Israel from impending doom. And as we mentioned, this story takes place about halfway through the period of the judges, in the time of Gideon, who, if you read in Judges chapter 8, he had 70 children. And it says by many wives. He really wasn't someone who you would consider had high moral character. And that sets in contrast to the beautiful love story that we see in the book of Ruth. So now this new fledgling nation, Israel, right, conquers the land, and Joshua dies. But then we see them repeatedly fall short and fall into defeat, right, as they rebelled and departed from the Lord. And in the book of Judges, we see 7 distinct cycles of sin, this downward spiral. And it's characterized really in the last verse of the book of Judges. It says that every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And that was really the spiritual atmosphere in Israel at that time. Everybody was out for themselves. They did that which was right in their own eyes. And that's what made this time of the judges really the darkest time in the nation of Israel, right? And, after they've been delivered from Egypt, after they've conquered the land of Canaan under Joshua, right? They've inhabited this land, right? But now after their conquest, when Joshua dies, not even one generation later, right? They failed to follow through and finish the job of completely driving their enemies out. So it's interesting. God commanded the Israelites, to purge the land of the Canaanites and eliminate all their idols, right? Deuteronomy 7:16, before they went into the land, he said, man, thou shalt consume all the people which the Lord thy God shall deliver unto thee, right? Neither shall you serve their gods. That will be a snare unto you. Or Deuteronomy 12:2 and 3, utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which you shall possess served their gods, right? All the high mountains, all the hills, under every green tree, overthrow their altars, right? Break down their pillars, burn their groves with fire, hew down their graven images, right? Or Deuteronomy 20, verses 17 and 18, right? He utterly destroyed them, namely the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, that they teach you not to do after all their abominations, which they have done unto their gods. So should you sin against your God. In other words, God told them, listen, when you go in and you take the land which I've promised you, you've got to wipe out all the people with all their idolatry and all their abominations. Otherwise, they're going to infect you. And so as a result of their lack of follow through, their enemies did infect them with their immorality, with their hedonism, with their idolatry, which resulted in them falling away from the Lord. And there was corruption within and oppression from without. Think of it. After God's strong hand brought them out of Egypt, after God supernaturally parted the Red Sea, after God supernaturally parted the Jordan River, after the priest stepped into the waters and the Jordan River parted, right? After God brought the walls of Jericho down 90 feet high, they marched around them once a day for 6 days. And on the seventh day, 7 times, they blew the trumpet and the walls came down and they destroyed the inhabitants. They went throughout the land conquering the people, and God delivered city after city unto them. Right? Even so much that as they went, they divided and conquered the land. They went right into the center, and then they went down into the south. And in Joshua chapter 10, they were in the midst of the battle, and God held the sun in the sky for 24 hours. It didn't go down for a whole night so they could finish the battle. God was with them every step of the way. He promised them, as I was with Moses, I'll also be with you. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Every place the sole of your foot will touch, I'll be with you. I'll give it unto you. And even though God was so faithful to what he promised, right, their hearts departed, right? Can you imagine? Even God sent hornets into the land and used hornets to drive people out of their cities, so they were able to inhabit cities that were already built. The houses and lands and pastures and so many things were already established, and the hornets drove them out, and they were able to just move right in to a land that was prosperous, flowing with milk and honey. But all of that, once they settled in the land, their hearts departed from the Lord. So the former generation saw God's hand mightily at work. And then they passed away, and it was hardly a generation, not even a full generation. And they were going their own way, and they forgot that it was God who gave them all that they had. It was God that was their king, right? And their moral decay brought judgment upon them. And when judgment came, they cried out to the Lord. When they were oppressed, they cried out to the Lord. And when they cried out, the Lord heard them, and he raised up deliverers. He raised up judges who would come and rescue them time and time again, right? He'd rescue them by sending military champions, right, to rescue them, like Gideon in chapter 6 through 8, right, with the Midianites, right, or Samson, right, with the Philistines, and these great champions, these great warriors, many of them with not very strong moral character, would come in and would deliver the people of God. And then there would be a time of silence, and then they would begin to make wrong decisions and fall into idolatry and hedonism and immorality, copying the people that lived in the land. So the book of Ruth is like a cameo, right? Displaying a godly remnant, one family, right, from Israel that was faithful to God, that remained true to God, that magnified the beauty and virtue of God in the midst of spiritual darkness in the time of the judges. Now, I know that's a lot for introduction just in the first phrase of chapter 1, but in verse 1 in the B, it says, "And there was a famine in the land." So in the time that the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And famines are mentioned in relationship to Israel 13 times in the scriptures. And you remember that the promises to Israel were physical, they were natural, and they were temporal. And God would deal with his people in natural ways, through natural events, right? And every time these famines occurred, it was really judgment upon Israel as a result of their departure from the Lord. And we see in passages like Romans 15:4 and 1 Corinthians 10:6 and 10:11 that when we read the Old Testament, it's for our example. We learn the principles of how God dealt with his people in Israel's history, and we know how God will deal with us today, although the promises for us as the people of God are heavenly. They're eternal. They're supernatural promises. Like we're blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places. And sometimes the things that are happening in the land that we live in aren't necessarily related directly to the people of God, right? And we have to find that careful balance, because at times like this, with a pandemic occurring, many people say, well, this is the judgment of God. And while it very may well be, that's not an absolute. We can't definitely say that this is the judgment of God because of the moral depravity of the day in which we live, right? And sometimes we look at our own character flaws, and when bad things happen in our life, we say, well, that probably happened because I did this. Listen, we live in a time of grace. God loves us because he is good, not because we are good. He gives eternal life because he is good, not because we are good. And when bad things happen, we can't always equate that to what we've done or not done in our life. God's grace is more abundant than that. Amen? Many times that's just our own subjectivity. But at the same time, anything that happens in our lives, right? God is working all things together for good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. God uses all the circumstances of life to train us to be faithful disciples, to be faithful warriors, right? One of my favorite verses is this passage in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 3. It says, endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. Whatever you face, whatever you go through, right? Endure it with patience, right? So, in the C part of verse 1, it says, a certain man from Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in Moab. Now, the names in the Old Testament many times have significant meanings. And so the name Bethlehem meant house of bread, and Judah was praise. So this man left the house of bread and praise, and he went to sojourn in Moab. Sojourn, it just means a temporary journey. It's not permanent. He didn't move his residence. He just was taking a short trip. He was going to go and temporarily stay in Moab. So he left the house of bread and praise to go to Moab. Now, if you looked at a map, when the children of Israel crossed the Jordan River, they went from east and they crossed the Jordan River into the west, and they settled there. And this man came from Bethlehem, Judah, which was in the south, the southern, what later would become the southern kingdom. 2 tribes, Judah in the south, and 10 tribes in the north, right, made up the 12 tribes of Israel. This man was in the southern part of Bethlehem, Judah, and he crossed back over the Jordan to the east side of the Jordan River to a place called Moab, right? It's about a 50-mile journey on the other side of the Dead Sea. And you remember Moab, right? He was the son of Lot's daughter, right? Conceived in incest. When Lot was drunk, he had incest with his daughter. And you remember in Numbers 25 that Balaam was being tempted by Balak, right? And to curse the people of God. But of course, the prophet of God could not put a curse upon the people of God. And he told them, listen, even if you gave me a house full of silver and gold, I couldn't curse the people of God. And of course he couldn't. But what was he doing? He was really asking for a bribe, right? Try me, give me a house full of silver and gold, and I'll see what I can do about it. And what he did was he took, as the prophet of God, and led the people of God to encamp next to the Moabites. You'll see this in Numbers chapter 25. And why did he do that? Because tradition and history tells us that the Moabitess people were a beautiful, dark-skinned people, and as they lived in the desert, they wore very little clothing. And when the Israelite men, right, and who lived with the Israelite women, who were told by God how to dress, and they dressed in a very modest way, when these men were out and about and they saw the Moabitess women without tops and very little on the bottoms, right, they were tempted. And you'll see that one man went into a tent with a woman, and Phinehas had to deal with that, right? And the Moabitess people, they worshipped Chemosh, right? It was similar to Baal, a fertility god, right? And God had some thoughts about Moab. He said this in Psalm 108:9, Moab is my washpot, really meaning my garbage can, right? And although it doesn't specifically say it here, you know, the traditional Jewish narrative relates that this was God's judgment upon Elimelech and his wife Naomi for leaving Bethlehem, right, the house of praise and bread, to go to Moab, God's garbage can, right? And, you know, most likely Elimelech's intention was just to spend a short amount of time in Moab. I mean, why would you leave the house of bread and praise and go down to God's garbage can, right? Maybe he had a great job offer there, right? Maybe he thought he could make a boatload of money, right? Maybe he thought there were some great golf courses there, right? Maybe it seemed like a good opportunity to provide for his family. I mean, after all, there was a famine in the land. There was no food. The provision had dried up. It was the house of praise and the house of bread, the house of God's provision, but the brook was drying up, right? So he went to go seek another provision, right? And, you know, the reality is, even good people make bad decisions sometimes. Have you ever been there? I mean, I have. We all have. Listen, Elimelech wouldn't be the first person, and he definitely won't be the last person that would lift up his eyes and consider something better outside the will of God. I mean, isn't that what Lot did when he talked with Abraham? He lifted up his eyes and he saw that the fields toward Sodom were beautiful, and he chose that for himself. But I think the question really is if they knew then, you know, what they would come to find out later, would they still go to Moab, right? Probably not. You know what I've found over the years? The problem with running from your troubles is that when you get where you're going, your troubles are still with you, right? And, I think of this verse in James chapter 4. James says it so well. He says, come on now. If you say today we'll go into such a city and we'll buy and sell and make a profit, right? Be careful. You don't know what you're going to encounter tomorrow. For what is your life? It's but a vapor. It's here for a moment and it vanishes away. So we ought to say, hey, if the Lord wills, we'll do this or we'll do that, right? And it really pays to think things through, right? Sometimes we make decisions and the reality is we have to live with them, right? So Elimelech and his wife Naomi, and they had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I know it's spelled CH, but it's really a K sound, Chilion. And their names had meaning, right? Elimelech means God is my king. Now think of this. Naomi means beautiful, pleasant, right? So God is my king marries beautiful, pleasant, and they came from the house of praise and the house of bread, God's provision and house of plenty, right? And then they have these children, Mahlon, which means sickly, and Chilion, which means puny, right? And notice in verse 2, it says that they continued in Moab. In other words, they probably stayed too long, right? A quick trip, a quick sojourn down, to Moab ended up being 10 years. And in verse 3, Elimelech died. In other words, Naomi became a widow. This beautiful couple, right? Beautiful, pleasant, right? Married, God is my king. And they had beautiful children. They came from the house of praise, the house of bread, God's provision. And then they had these sickly children and they left because there was a famine in the land and they went looking for God's provision someplace else or their own provision someplace else. And then her husband died, right? And then it says in verse 4 that the two sons took wives of the women of Moab. They were attracted and fell in love with women in the country in which they lived. And so Mahlon married Ruth, right? And her name also meant beautiful. And it had both the sense that it was physically and her personality was beautiful. So in other words, she seemed to be a bubbly, vivacious, very friendly, outgoing, gregarious type person, if you can read that much into the meaning of a name. But Chilion married Opah, which meant deer or fawn, and she seemed to be more of what you would think of as very athletic. And I think the first question we have to understanding Deuteronomy 7:3, God, prohibited his people from intermarrying with the peoples that were in the land of Canaan, right? And it wasn't that God was against interracial marriage, but what he didn't want was the influence of the false gods of the people that were in the land of Canaan to influence his people if they were to marry people from other nations, like they would in the future with King Solomon, right? And so I don't really believe that Mahlon and Chilion disregarded the law, but instead it was probably like The Big Fat Greek Wedding. You've seen that movie, right? And there was a man and he was basically agnostic. He didn't really have any true faith in God, but he met a Greek girl, and it was very important to the Greek girl, and especially the parents, that he would be baptized as a Greek in order to marry her, right? And so he thought, if I can marry her, I'll gladly become a Greek. I don't have any problem with that. If that'll make your parents happy, I'll gladly do it. And probably that was the case with Orpah and Ruth, these two Moabitess women that married Mahlon and Chilion. And you kind of have to ask, why would these two beautiful, right, and athletic women want to marry Malin, who was, his name meant, sickly, and Kilian, whose name meant puny. Why would these two Moabitess, most likely attractive Moabitess women, want to marry puny and sickly, right? And maybe it was really in regard to the spiritual atmosphere, right? Whereas the judges were very powerful, Samson was strong, and you remember he tied the tails together of 300 foxes, lit them on fire, and threw them into the camp of the Philistines, killed 1,000 with the jawbone of an ass. He was a major warrior, but immoral, indecisive, and he would vacillate between following God and not following God. But maybe, the contrast of these boys was that they were spiritual and they were moral and they came from a beautiful family, and these girls were more interested in their spiritual and moral character than in their physical appearance, right? So in Ruth 1 in verse 5, Malin and Kilian died. And in the time of the judges, this story is just incredible, because here's this beautiful family and they make a bad decision perhaps, and they leave the house of bread and praise and they go down to Moab, and her husband dies, and now her boys die, and now she's left just with these two daughter-in-laws. And we have to ask why. Why were the children sickly? Why did they die? Why did the father die? And it really leads us to this question that really is the number one question that people ask about God all the time. If God is so good, why do bad things happen to good people? And we know it's Romans chapter 5 and verse 12 is really a simple answer. By one man's disobedience, Adam, the first man created, right? Sin entered into the world. When he disobeyed God, he brought sin into the world. And death came through sin, so that death passed upon all mankind, right? Sickness, disease, pandemics, right? Violence, hatred, the behavior that you see in the world all around you is a result of sin. But guess what? God has a plan of redemption. God's loved the world so much that he sent his own son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish. God came to redeem the world and pull them out of the curse of sin that is upon the world, right? And I want you to know that, even when people make decisions to go outside of God's will, and we've all done it in some measure, God is still waiting to be gracious. He doesn't give up on people, right? When you make a decision to leave the house of provision, the house of blessing, the house of praise, and you go outside of God's will looking for a provision, you know what? Sometimes you'll experience loss and grief and pain and hardship and heartache, right? And there'll be a time of darkness, but do you know that God is still with you? God is the same in the midst of the darkness as he is in the light. In fact, that's what Solomon said, speaking of God in 1 Kings 8:12. He said, the Lord said he would dwell in thick darkness. God is there in the darkness with you, right? God dwells in thick darkness, right? And in Isaiah 45:3, he says, I will give you treasures in darkness. I will give you hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, which call you by name, is the God of Israel. Listen, when you're in your darkest time, God has a plan of redemption. Can you send me a chat? Send redemption. God has a plan of redemption. Listen, when your life feels like it's in pieces, when your dreams have been shattered, when the puzzle seems to be broken, when you don't know the next step to take, listen, we can learn a lesson that when we're in our darkest time, we can fall on our knees before the living God and we can cry out to him. And just like in the days of the judges, God will hear our prayer. He will send a deliverer, and that deliverer today is Jesus Christ. And he will send the Holy Spirit as well, and he will guide you into truth. He will illuminate the truth of his word. He will give you compassion and mercy and comfort, and he will direct your steps to his plan of redemption. And just like he was in the time of Ruth, in the times of the judges, in the story of Ruth, God will be there to manifest his presence to you in the midst of whatever you go through in your darkest times of life, right? And sometimes in our life, we have these major crises, right? Failures. Sometimes we lose our temper. We get angry, we quit. Whatever it is, we quit our job, right? We sometimes we quit a team. Sometimes we say stupid things, right? We quit our marriage, right? We quit a church. But you know what's so beautiful? We can make simple decisions, right? And God can redeem all our mistakes. Miraculously, the power of God can break through in the midst of your darkness, in the midst of our foolishness, and he can turn our curses into blessings, right? The Lord your God will turn your curses into blessings because the Lord your God loves you. That's who God is, Deuteronomy 23:5. And just another note, is sometimes we feel this intense pressure in America, right? That we have to, move up the corporate ladder, right? And sometimes that would force us to leave the house of blessing and praise to find a greater provision, right? When it may not even be God's perfect will. High school students do this sometimes. They feel pressure. I've got to go to college. Everybody's going to college. Where do I go? Sometimes, we get a degree and then we have to go find a job in line with our degree, and we enter into it and we don't have God's peace. We don't sense that we're really in the center of God's will, in that perfect will of God that Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 speak about, that we prove what is that good, perfect, and acceptable will. Listen, it's in God's presence. It's in the house of praise and bread. Amen? And could it be that if you abide in God's will and you know that you're in his will, God will provide everything you need right where you are? And sometimes it's just as simple as humbling ourselves and praying, Lord, what is your will? Show me your path, right? And choose to do his will and lay aside our pride, right? And our own ability to choose what is best for me, what we think is best. Amen? Well, in Ruth 1:6, Naomi decided to return from Moab to Judah because she heard that God had visited her people in giving them bread. What an amazing thing, right? The famine ended. The rains came, right? The crops began to grow, and God was calling her home. She had lost her husband. She had lost her son. She had faced much pain, and there was grief inside her heart, right? But God was still with her. This is really a parallel with Luke chapter 15, right? There was a lost sheep, there was a lost coin, and there was a lost son. We call it the story of the prodigal son, right? And he was in his father's house. He was blessed in every conceivable day. But one day he became discontented with what he had. And he said, Father, give me. He demanded, give me what is mine. And he took what was his father's inheritance for him. And he went out, and it says he spent it on riotous living. He did whatever he could to indulge himself in the culture of the day. And one day, after he had spent everything and he realized he had no more money, and he was eating the pig slop, right, with the pigs on the hog pen trail, right? And he came to himself and he thought to himself, my goodness, the servants in my father's house have it better. than what I have right now. And he came to himself and he said, you know what, I'm going to go back home. And as he came home, the beauty of the story is not just that he was a prodigal, it was the father was so filled with love. He was looking for his son, and his son, came up the lane and he ran to him. It says he ran to him, right? And that's the heart of our God. Anytime, wherever we are, whatever we've gone through, wherever we've been, whatever failure we've experienced, when we're broken and filled with grief, and entered into depression, God has a plan of redemption. We just have to come home. And when we come home, the Father runs to us. And you remember, he kissed him on his neck, right? He put shoes on his feet and gave him the ring on his finger, right? And a robe. And he said, this, my son, was lost, but now he's found. And he welcomed him home. Right? Do you see the picture that God is painting here in this opening part of the book of Ruth? Do you see the contrast, how dark, how bleak life was for the people in Israel that had departed from God? But here's this beautiful family. And even though they had made a wrong decision, God's going to bring her home. And he's got a plan of redemption for this family. It's a cameo that God is exhibiting, right? And whether their decision was right or whether it was wrong, God was there and he was going to work to bring her home. And that's what God did with Naomi. And he gave her a daughter-in-law who was faithful and become the great-grandmother of King David, right? And it says Ruth ended up being more valuable to Naomi than 7 sons, right? God would take a woman that was a Moabitess woman that was not from his people Israel and make her his people, right? And isn't that what God has done with us believers in Jesus Christ? Those of us who are Gentiles, we weren't born as God's people, but we were born again. We received the free gift of eternal life, and God made us his people. He brought us into the family of God. And that's what God will do with Israel. He promised in Deuteronomy chapter 29, if you rebel, Israel, against me, I'll scatter you across the face of the earth. And isn't that what God did, just as he promised? But he also promised that he'd regather Israel. And he did that in part in 1948 when he gathered the nation of Israel back in their homeland. In fact, the only nation that ever was taken into captivity, exiled from their nation, and then regathered in the land in which they were exiled from. God kept his promise, but it's not in full. One day, God will regather Israel, and there'll be a national regeneration of Israel. All Israel will be saved. They are his firstborn son, Exodus 4:21. God loves Israel. And though they're scattered all across the face of the earth today, one day God's going to bring them home. And wherever you are, whether you're close to God today, or maybe if you find yourself far from God today, God has a plan to bring you home. God has a plan to restore what you've lost. God has a plan to work his plan of redemption in your life. Listen, if you ever find yourself in a far country like that prodigal son, if you ever wake up one day and say, what am I doing here? Why did I stay so long? And maybe you think, I probably brought this on myself. I mean, how could I go back to God? I've disappointed him. I've failed him. Listen, God has a plan of redemption. God will restore back to you what you've lost. He wants to bless you. All he really cares about is that you come home. God loves you with an everlasting love, and with loving kindness, he desires to draw you to him. Do you believe that? I hope you do, and I hope you've been blessed. And we just want to really thank you for listening in. And we ask you again, if you enjoyed this message, would you share it? Would you share this message on Facebook? You can go right to the bottom and just share it. You can send somebody a text and you can share this message with them. I know there's people all over that need to hear this. They're in a far country. They're in a place far from God, and they need to know that they can come home. Amen. Lord, we ask you to bless these words to our heart. And we just today give this invitation. If there's anyone that's listening today and you find yourself in this place, would you just, at this time, just fall into the arms of God? Just say, Lord Jesus, I acknowledge you as the one true God. And I believe that you do have a plan of redemption, even for me. Lord, come into my life. I receive you, the God of mercy, the God of all grace, the faithful God who loves people. I believe you paid the price for me. And I ask you to come into my life, live within me, bring me back, buy me back, make me your own. I want to be part of the family of God. We ask these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, if you were listening today and you thought, I'd really just like to talk to somebody. I'd like to speak with somebody. We have people that would love to speak with you, and they're trained to listen and hear about what you're going through and say a prayer to you and direct you to get closer unto God. And so if you would like to speak with somebody, you can call this number, 302-273-1184. That's 302-273-1184. Or you can send an email to lifecommunitychurchoffice@gmail.com. As you can tell, we're excited about this series, and we're thankful that we're able to bring this word to you today. And I just want to really reach out and thank God for Life Community Church and the faithful people that give and support the work that we do here. And I really have always believed this principle that God's work done God's way will not lack God's support. God always provides for his people and his work. And when we're faithful to do God's work, he always touches the heart of people to bless the work. And if you'd like to do that, and you can go right on our website, lifecommunitychurch.net, find our giving portal, which is called Tithely, enter some information, and you can give directly online. And if you feel more comfortable sending a check, you can send a check to Life Community Church, 750 Otts Chapel Road, Newark, Delaware, 19713. Checks only, no cash. Or you can drop a check off at Community Hope Marketplace at the same address, 750 Otts Chapel Road, and they would be happy to receive that. Again, checks, no cash. And while you're there, you can do some shopping. Everything's been sanitized several times a day. They have a lot of great product in there, and we would be so blessed if you stopped in. God bless you.